The suitcase was still half empty when my husband walked into the bedroom, looked at me folding my clothes, and laughed. He actually laughed, because he believed this was another one of my emotional moments that would disappear by morning. He leaned against the doorframe with the confidence of a man who had never truly imagined losing me and said the words that would change both of our lives. If I was so unhappy, then why didn't I just leave? He said it like a dare. He said it because he was certain I wouldn't. He knew exactly where I kept my courage buried, and he believed he had buried it too deeply for me to ever find it again. What he didn't know was that something inside me had already broken quietly, long before that night. And when he watched me place the last sweater into the suitcase, his smile disappeared. For years, I had mistaken endurance for love. I had convinced myself that marriage meant staying through every difficult season, forgiving every careless word, making excuses for every disappointment, and shrinking my own needs whenever my husband needed more space for his. I had become an expert at pretending everything was fine. I could smile at family dinners while feeling completely invisible. I could stand beside him at parties while he spoke over me as though I were furniture. I could wake up before sunrise, prepare breakfast, handle the bills, remember birthdays, keep the house running, and still somehow feel like I was failing at being a wife. The strangest part was that nobody noticed. People often notice when a woman cries, but they rarely notice when she stops expecting anything at all. If you believe that kindness, second chances, and knowing your own worth can change a life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need to hear this story, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps these stories reach people who might be silently struggling behind a smile. My name is Claire, and for 12 years I believed my marriage could be saved if I simply tried harder. My husband, Daniel, was successful, confident, and ambitious. From the outside, we looked like the kind of couple people envied. We lived in a comfortable suburban house with a neat garden, 2 cars in the driveway, and framed photographs covering the hallway walls. In those photographs, we were always smiling. There were pictures from our wedding, vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, and anniversaries. Anyone looking at those walls would have thought we had built a beautiful life together. What the photographs never showed was the silence between us after the cameras were put away. When we first met, Daniel was different. He used to notice little things. He remembered how I took my coffee. He would send me messages during the day just to tell me he was thinking about me. Once, during a storm, he drove nearly an hour because I had casually mentioned that I was nervous being alone. He arrived soaked from the rain, carrying takeout food and a ridiculous smile. I remember thinking that I had found someone who would never let me feel alone. Marriage changed slowly. There was no single day when everything collapsed. It happened in tiny pieces. A sarcastic comment here. A forgotten promise there. A night when he came home late and acted annoyed that I had waited for him. A weekend when I asked him to spend time together, and he told me I was being needy. Each moment seemed too small to justify a confrontation, so I swallowed it. Eventually, swallowing became my normal way of surviving. The first time Daniel called me ungrateful, I cried in the bathroom for nearly an hour. The 10th time, I simply washed my face and returned to the kitchen. The 100th time, the word barely registered. That frightened me more than the insult itself. I realized I was becoming someone who could be hurt without even acknowledging the wound. Our daughter, Emma, was 11 when I began noticing how much she understood. She never asked why I became quiet when her father entered the room. She never asked why I stopped laughing at the dinner table. Children often understand more than adults realize. Instead, she would sometimes come into my room at night, sit beside me on the edge of the bed, and quietly lean her head against my shoulder. Those moments became my refuge. I told myself I'd stay for Emma. I told myself that keeping the family together was worth the loneliness. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I was also staying because I was afraid. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of people's judgment. Afraid of financial uncertainty. Afraid of waking up one morning and realizing that I had thrown away 12 years for nothing. Most of all, I was afraid that maybe Daniel was right when he said nobody else would put up with me. Then came the night everything changed. It had been a long Thursday. I had spent the entire day dealing with work, groceries, a broken washing machine, and Emma's school project. Daniel came home late, irritated about something that had happened at his office. I asked whether he wanted dinner, and he responded with a sharpness that immediately filled the room. I didn't argue. I simply placed his plate on the table and walked away. Later that evening, we began arguing in the bedroom. I don't remember every word because sometimes the mind protects itself by letting certain moments become blurry. But I remember his expression. I remember how calmly he looked at me when he told me that if I hated our marriage so much, I should leave. He expected tears. He expected an apology. He expected me to beg him to reconsider. Instead, something inside me became strangely still. I walked to the closet. I pulled out an old suitcase. Daniel laughed. He thought I was making a point. He thought I would pack a few things, cry for 10 minutes, and then put everything back. I opened the closet and began folding clothes. 1 sweater. 2 pairs of jeans. My blue dress. A pair of shoes. My hands were shaking, but I kept going. Daniel stopped laughing. He asked what I was doing, but I didn't answer. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to explain myself. I wasn't trying to convince him to understand my pain. I wasn't asking for permission to have feelings. I was packing. He watched as I placed Emma's favorite photograph into the front pocket of the suitcase. Then I packed her school things, some documents, and a small box of family photographs. I heard his footsteps behind me, but I didn't turn around. He finally understood that this was different. The man who had spent years telling me I would never leave suddenly looked frightened by the possibility that I actually might. But there was another reason I was packing, and Daniel didn't know it yet. 3 weeks earlier, I had received an email from a small company in another city where I had once interviewed. They had offered me a position. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. The salary was enough to support Emma and me while we rebuilt our lives. I had kept the offer secret because I had been terrified of what Daniel would say. That night, when he dared me to leave, I realized something. He had just given me the courage I had been waiting for. The next morning, I woke before everyone else. The house was quiet. For a few minutes, I stood in the kitchen looking at the familiar walls. I remembered Emma taking her first steps across that floor. I remembered Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, rainy afternoons, and countless ordinary moments that had once seemed unimportant but suddenly felt precious. Leaving didn't mean none of those memories mattered. It meant I was finally accepting that memories could be beautiful even when the future had to be different. I made Emma breakfast and told her that we were going to stay somewhere else for a while. I didn't give her every adult detail. Children deserve honesty, but they shouldn't have to carry the weight of their parents' failures. I simply told her that sometimes people can love each other and still hurt each other, and that leaving a painful situation isn't the same as giving up. She looked at me for a long time. Then she hugged me. That hug nearly broke me. We left that afternoon. Daniel didn't stop us. He stood in the doorway, watching. I expected him to shout. I expected anger. Instead, he looked confused, almost like a man who had suddenly awakened in a house he no longer recognized. For the first few weeks, life was difficult. Our new apartment was small. The heating made strange noises. The kitchen barely had enough counter space. Emma complained that the bedroom was smaller than her old one. I cried after she went to sleep because I felt guilty for changing everything. But something else happened too. I started breathing again. I got the new job. It wasn't easy, but my coworkers treated me with respect. When I made a mistake, my manager corrected me without humiliating me. When I did something well, people noticed. I discovered that I still had opinions. I still had dreams. I still had a sense of humor. Slowly, I started becoming the woman I had been before I spent years trying to make myself smaller. Emma changed too. She became more confident. She joined an art club at school. She started laughing more. One evening, while we were eating dinner at our tiny kitchen table, she looked at me and said that she liked our new home because it felt peaceful. That sentence stayed with me. Peaceful. I hadn't realized how much noise we had been living with until silence felt like a luxury. Months passed. Daniel began calling. At first, his calls were angry. Then they became apologetic. Then they became emotional. He said he missed us. He said he had made mistakes. He said he hadn't understood what he had until it was gone. I listened. But listening didn't mean returning. That was something I had to learn. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. You can forgive someone without giving them the same access to your life. Daniel eventually asked to meet. We sat in a quiet cafe on a rainy afternoon. For the first time in years, I looked directly into his eyes without worrying about how he would react to what I said. He admitted that he had believed I would always stay. He admitted that he had confused my patience with weakness. He admitted that every time I forgave him, he assumed it meant his behavior hadn't been serious. And then he said something that I never expected. He told me that when he saw the empty closet, he finally understood that I had been leaving long before I packed the suitcase. I didn't argue. Because he was right. I had been leaving in pieces. I had left every time I stopped sharing my thoughts. I had left every time I swallowed my tears. I had left every time I chose silence because speaking honestly felt dangerous. The suitcase wasn't the beginning of my departure. It was simply the first time he noticed. Over time, Daniel began therapy. He took responsibility for his behavior instead of blaming circumstances. He learned to listen without defending himself. He started rebuilding his relationship with Emma slowly and respectfully. As for me, I didn't rush toward a decision. I had spent 12 years making choices based on fear. I wasn't going to make my next choice out of guilt. 1 year after I left, I returned to the old house for the first time. The garden looked different. The walls seemed smaller. I walked through the hallway and saw those old photographs. For years I had believed those pictures represented the life I had lost. Now I understood something different. They represented a life I had lived. And surviving something doesn't mean you have to hate every part of it. Some memories can remain